Eastern Massasauga Rattlesnake is one of the pygmy rattlesnakes. It's in a separate genus than all of the other true rattlesnakes, the Crotalus genus. There's 3 different species of Massasauga, but the one that we're talking about here in Michigan, the one we're familiar with, is the Eastern Massasauga. They occupy open canopy wetlands, and that's where they spend much of their time throughout the spring, fall, and winter. But then during the summer, they migrate to adjacent upland habitats. They're a very shy, cryptic species, and even though rattlesnakes will give you a warning if you get too close, Massasaugas have this tendency to not really rattle unless you make eye contact with them, right? So you can walk within a foot of them, and they're not interested in striking, they're not interested in rattling, they're perfectly content to just let you walk right on by. These aren't animals that you necessarily need to be afraid of. Respectful, make sure you're keeping your boundaries, but they're not something that anyone really needs to be concerned about. We've seen a huge decline in Eastern Massasauga populations.
It is a federally listed as threatened species, was listed in 2016, and so it was a candidate species for listing for many, many years. Michigan is considered the stronghold for the species throughout its range.
So we have, over 100 extant populations that we know of, and most of the other states usually have 10 or less.
The main way that we've lost Eastern Massasaugas is through habitat destruction.
We drained a lot of habitat for farming and for other purposes, basically converted it over to something that they could not use at all, and likely created a lot of smaller isolated populations.
One of the things that goes along with habitat fragmentation is population fragmentation. And so a healthy metapopulation maintains genetic diversity. And so that way, when new pathogens and this sort of thing come along, there's more likely to be a mutation in their genome that gives them resistance to that new threat. With this habitat fragmentation, we've cut off that migration between populations, and so they're inbreeding. Then when one of these new threats moves in, it just wipes them all out. Novel pathogens and novel threats are a constant concern. Snake fungal disease is this fungus that starts out on the scales of the snake, and it works its way down through the skin, and once it actually starts to get into the tissues of the snake, it will result in death. And so a lot of times as we're moving between habitats, we're bleaching our boots, we're bleaching our equipment, and really that's a drop in the bucket for all of the things that are moving between habitats. Right?
The only way you can preserve or conserve species is if people care about them. So you do want to encourage that appreciation. We just want them to appreciate it ethically. Folks they spend a lot of time in the field, often they can find rare species. One, don't communicate where those locations are. Be thoughtful and deliberate about minimizing impact of habitat. The other thing is in several states, you have to have permits to do any type of handling at all. If you're doing that properly, having disclaimers on your social media profiles that these were collected with permits, or these were photographed, or whatever the situation may be. But essentially leading by example, contacting Michigan Natural Features Inventory and giving them photographic evidence and general location for agencies or conservation organizations. That is helpful information.
If people see Massasaugas reporting those observations, also helps us determine if a population is still present. A couple of the new populations that have been documented have been just from people that have been hiking in a park and then seeing it and then reporting it to us. We have a huge gap in our knowledge of the presence of populations on private land. So knowing about where there are Massasauga populations that exist on private land is really important. So if there are private landowners that happen to have Massasaugas on their property, sharing that information with us, with the state, would be very helpful. And then I think for folks that are wanting to take that next step, we are always looking for help with some of our surveys and research. And so if folks are interested in coming out and actually helping us in the field, we would love to have the help.
They eat rodents, and rodents can pass diseases to humans directly, but they can also pass other vectors to us. So one of the main ways that ticks move around through the environment are through rodents.
So one rodent can have 15 to 50 ticks on it. Snakes eat the mice and the voles and all the things that carry ticks that carry Lyme disease and all the other diseases that are tick-borne.
Their venoms are being used in research for medications. Their very close cousin, the dusky pygmy, was sort of the catalyst for medication that's used during open heart surgery to prevent clotting.
Massasaugas are just one little part of a giant ecosystem that you have to pay attention to all the different parts of it. And once you study all individual parts, it's just fascinating how they all work together.
Conserving these rattlesnakes means we're conserving habitats that are home to a lot of other threatened and endangered species that we also really value. Things like eastern box turtles, or Blanding's turtles, or the Mitchell's satyr butterfly.
That we really have a unique and really important role to play in conservation and recovery of this species. They're really cool species, and so it's our only, venomous snake that we have in Michigan. And they're just, if you ever get to see one, they're just such a really fascinating species. And so I hope that we get to continue to have them as part of our Michigan's natural heritage.